The most difficult performance of my life was the one I gave every Sunday sitting silently, feigning ignorance, while the house I privately owned was publicly debated. That December evening in Dayton, Ohio, the heavy silver fork in my hand felt less like cutlery and more like the cold, hard weight of two parallel lives colliding. For decades, this family had mistaken my silence for inadequacy. Now the mortgage secret, the core of my carefully constructed financial independence, was leaking, threatening to drown their comfortable delusions in a wave of unforgiving truth. The air in the Carter kitchen, perpetually thick with the smell of pot roast and unaddressed resentment, was a sensory trigger I could never escape. I sat at the table, 28 years old, the perpetual target of my father's weekly inquisition. Thomas the Patriarch possessed a voice calibrated for pronouncements of disappointment, not open discourse. His accusation launched across the meager table setting was sharp and deeply personal. "If you truly possess such intelligence, Olivia," he challenged, his voice rising, "then demonstrate it by contributing meaningfully. Start paying your own way." His finger trembled, the fury never quite matching the subject at hand, but always finding its perfect target in me. Evan, my older brother, the golden son, seized the opportunity with practiced ease. He reclined in his chair, a smug, brittle smirk playing on his lips. "She's barely making rent on that closet in Columbus, Dad," he drawled, ensuring the cruelty resonated perfectly. "How could she possibly afford to alleviate your burdens?" Linda, my mother, offered her habitual muted contribution. Her mouth tightened into that familiar thin line of perpetual exhaustion and disapproval. "Such a pity, dear," she murmured, her gentle shake of the head, dismissing me entirely. A regrettable footnote in the grand, flawed narrative of the Carter family. I kept my gaze lowered. I continued the mechanical motion of consuming the overcooked pot roast, every motion measured, every swallow, an act of emotional resilience. I had perfected the painful, silent alchemy of swallowing their bitter judgment, along with my food constructing a deep, quiet core of self-worth in the process. The kitchen felt small, perpetually burdened by the weight of unfulfilled expectations. Sunday dinner at the Carters was less a family gathering and more a predictable low-level financial audit where my value was perpetually reviewed and found deficient. The walls themselves seemed to sag with history. The framed family photos tilted marginally on the mantelpiece. The cabinet varnish was dull and scratched, visual evidence of attention and resources consistently diverted towards chasing Evan's mercurial potential. The worn linoleum floor was less a surface and more a map of the financial anxieties that plagued my parents, the very definition of toxic family dynamics. My father paused his harangue, pressing his thumb and forefinger to his temples. It was a calculated gesture, the patriarch crushed by a financial weight he felt entitled to make public theater. The electric bill arrived, $247. I am asking, how am I expected to keep this entire operation functional on my meager salary? "If some individuals could achieve something productive for once," Evan cut in, his eyes flicking towards me with that effortless air of superiority born of family favoritism. I could have refuted his implication easily. I had been financially independent since 18. Evan, conversely, was still funding his series of perpetually brilliant, perpetually unexecuted business concepts with parental loans. But I knew the truth was an inconvenient disruption to their comfortable fantasy. My phone, resting in my pocket, vibrated once sharply. I ignored it, recognizing the urgency of my professional life trying to breach my domestic prison. "Your brother is on the verge of a breakthrough, Thomas," my mother quickly interjected, her face lighting up with the fierce defensive pride reserved solely for her son. She reached across the table to touch Evan's arm. "Tell them about the concept, dear." Evan launched into his convoluted, jargon-heavy explanation, a concept almost certainly scraped from an internet forum hours earlier. They leaned in, listening, nodding, exhibiting the same blind faith that had always told them my logical, pragmatic mind was simply not the right fit for true innovation. The phone vibrated again, an insistent, rapid pulse. "Olivia, put that damn thing away," my father snapped, the sound jarring me from my practiced, feigned absorption. I retrieved the phone, intending to silence the disruption, but the caller ID, instantly froze my fingers mid-motion. Daniel Ortiz. First National Bank. "I must take this call," I said quietly, my voice surprisingly level. "During our shared meal, Olivia—" My mother's voice was instantly layered with icy disapproval, a tone reserved exclusively for my actions, my every departure from the script of the struggling daughter. But I was already moving. I pushed back my chair and walked toward the back door, the familiar anxiety in my chest replaced by a sharp, focused sense of dread and anticipation. I opened the screen door and stepped onto the small, cracked concrete landing. The cool December air of the Ohio evening instantly enveloped me, a sudden welcome solitude. The screen door hissed shut behind me. I answered the call immediately. "Ms. Carter." Daniel's voice carried the professional neutrality of a financial institution, precise and measured. "I am calling regarding the account associated with your father's property. We have received some rather unusual inquiries from other family members concerning the origin of the mortgage payments." My stomach tightened, a cold knot forming. "What specific inquiries, Daniel?" "Your brother contacted us earlier today. He requested the complete payment history, wanting to know the exact sourcing of the monthly deposits." Daniel paused, and I sensed the quiet professional judgment in the silence. "He appeared unaware that the primary mortgage obligation has been consistently satisfied for the last 4 years through your personal accounts, specifically the annual principal payments totaling $85,000. I closed my eyes, drawing a slow, sharp breath of the freezing air. 4 years of perfect, silent success. 4 years of meticulously ensuring they retained their home. 4 years of watching them elevate Evan while publicly dismissing me as a failure. The quiet fortress I had built was about to be breached because Evan's curiosity had finally led him to ask the one question he shouldn't have. "Ms. Carter, should we discontinue the payments? Your brother indicated he was prepared to assume the full responsibility for the property himself." The stark irony was physically painful. Evan assuming responsibility, the man who had bounced 3 checks last quarter. "No." I commanded, the word firm and absolute. "The arrangement is to remain active. And Daniel, you will provide absolutely no details concerning the payer. I will personally manage this situation from here." "Of course, but Ms. Carter, I should caution you, they are insistent. Your father initiated a call this morning as well." Through the thin glass of the dining room window, I could see their silhouettes. My family remained seated, partially visible in the dining light. My father gesticulated, likely continuing his rant about the cost of living. My mother nodded patiently. Evan was already absorbed back into his phone. "Thank you for the notification," I told Daniel, ending the call. I remained on the porch, letting the cold air settle on my skin. The backyard was the same unchanged landscape of my childhood, the chain-link fence, the patchy, winter-dormant grass. This house had taught me a single brutal lesson. Approval was a currency I would never earn. The screen door creaked open again. What was the nature of that communication? My father stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, his gaze now holding focused, potent suspicion. "Nothing that requires your immediate concern," I replied calmly. "The bank reached out to me earlier, something concerning the mortgage account." His eyes narrowed desperately, trying to penetrate a truth he was clearly not ready to face. "You don't happen to have any inside knowledge regarding that, would you, Olivia?" My phone rang again. Daniel, likely a final necessary confirmation. I did not silence the call this time. I tapped the speaker button, holding it just long enough for Daniel's professional voice to cut across the quiet porch like a sudden crack of glass. "Ms. Carter, just a final confirmation. Should we proceed with the automatic transfer of $85,000 annually for your father's mortgage, or would you like to make immediate changes to that established arrangement?" The ensuing silence was profound and absolute, swallowing every small sound of the surrounding neighborhood. My father's expression instantly fractured confusion, dissolved into sheer disbelief, followed by a sickening, painful recognition. His wine glass, frozen halfway to his lips, remained suspended. Behind him, visible through the screen door, my mother and Evan were also staring, having heard every single word through the house's thin walls. "I'll call you back shortly." I murmured into the phone and ended the call. What mortgage payment? My mother's voice was suddenly raw, demanding, pushing past my father onto the porch. Why is the bank talking to you about this? Evan followed his face, a complex mask of suspicion mixed with something that looked profoundly like fear. Are you engaging in illegal activity? Is this some convoluted scheme? I looked at all three of them. These people had spent a lifetime defining me consistently, treating me as secondary to Evan. They stood united in their utter incomprehension, their entire comfortable perception of my identity dissolving. We will absolutely discuss this situation, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the finality of a closing steel vault. But not here. Not now. I walked past them into the house, retrieving my purse from the hook by the door. My hands remained perfectly steady, even though my heart hammered a frantic celebratory rhythm against my ribs. This public, clumsy detonation was not my planned narrative, but I accepted it. Life rarely grants the perfection of a planned script. Olivia. My father's shout followed me down the short hallway. You cannot simply depart. What is the exact nature of this event? I paused at the front door and turned back, facing the confused, fractured tableau of my family. You have all spent years constructing who you believe I am. I stated the quiet words weighted with decades of suppressed truth. I believe it is time I showed you who I have actually become. I walked out into the cool, dark night, leaving them marooned with the immediate, unavoidable truth. In my car, I sat for a moment watching the house lights. Tomorrow I will bring the documentation. Tomorrow I would show them the daughter they had consciously refused to see. But tonight I needed to reinforce the ground beneath my own feet. I called Marcy, my business partner, the only external observer who had believed in my potential without ever needing evidence. I need the documentation, Marcy, I instructed the moment she answered. All of it. Mortgage records, transfer histories, all the dates, everything. I'm finished with hiding the self-made woman I am. Are you prepared for the fight that comes next, Liv? She asked, her voice steady, an invaluable anchor. I looked at the house one last time, at the silhouettes of my family, still standing exactly where I had left them, their world fractured. I am ready, I confirmed. I am more prepared than I have ever been. The drive back to the outskirts of Columbus, a standard 40 minutes, felt like an endless transit through a newly unfamiliar landscape, every mile marker, a measure of the distance I'd placed between myself and their toxic family dynamics. Each traffic light forced a moment of silence, a pause for the dangerous, self-destructive habit of analyzing the wreckage I'd left behind. I could vividly construct the scene unfolding back at the house, Mother pacing the worn linoleum, demanding answers Father couldn't formulate. Evan undoubtedly would be hunched over his phone, attempting to crunch numbers that fundamentally invalidated his entire understanding of my existence. I was supposed to be the perpetually struggling sister, the underachiever they could generously pity while meticulously inflating every contour of her brother's non-existent potential. My phone pulsed constantly throughout the journey. Rapid-fire texts from my mother, a succession of missed calls from my father, each vibration a desperate magnetic attempt to pull me back into their orbit. I ignored them all systematically. I was done being immediately accessible. When I finally arrived at my building, a modest, anonymous one-bedroom in a sprawling complex, I lingered in the parking lot before cutting the ignition. The unit itself was entirely unremarkable, clean, perfectly affordable, and crucially invisible. I had selected Unit 4B precisely because it attracted no attention. No one driving past would ever suspect that the resident was the co-founder of a data analytics company valued in the multi-millions. This quiet, intentional anonymity had been the core of my defensive strategy for years. I climbed the exterior staircase, unlocked the door, and stepped into the small space I had painstakingly built for myself piece by piece. The furniture was practical, functional, acquired over years of careful, deliberate budgeting, not through a single splurge. The walls held pieces of abstract art I'd purchased from local struggling artists' work that mirrored my own slow, complex emergence. My laptop sat ready on the kitchen table, surrounded by notebooks filled with the complex algorithms my family would never be capable of understanding, much less appreciating. I brewed a cup of intensely strong Earl Grey tea and sat at the table, forcing myself to review the slow, agonizing journey that had delivered me to this specific, explosive moment. The family favoritism hadn't been an abrupt shift. It was a deeply embedded pattern predating my earliest memories. By the time I could comprehend the world, the hierarchy was already immutable. Evan was the firstborn, the only son father desired, the child predestined for the name, the legacy, and the total focus. I was simply the afterthought, the second child, a daughter in a lineage that only placed value on its sons. I vividly recalled the moment at age 12. I had been accepted into a highly selective summer STEM program, a genuine life-changing opportunity that could have unlocked doors beyond our small Ohio town. "You cannot go, Olivia," my mother had stated, her voice dismissive, never looking up from her plate. "Evan has his regional basketball tournament that week, and our presence is mandatory." "But this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance," I pleaded, the smallness of my own voice betraying my desperation. My father set his fork down with a deliberate, audible heaviness, signaling the absolute end of the discussion. "Your brother requires our visible support. You are robust. You will find other programs." There were no other programs remotely like that one. The moment I realized my measurable achievement was secondary to Evan's theoretical potential was the moment I started charting my own path. When I won the regional high school science fair, an achievement that could have immediately secured scholarships, they simply forgot the date and missed the award ceremony entirely. My phone, resting face down, began to ring again. It was Evan. I let the call ring out and listened to the voicemail immediately. "Olivia, what in the actual hell is happening? Mom and Dad are completely losing their minds. The bank is actually confirming you've been paying the mortgage. That is structurally impossible. You hold some dreary desk job, right? You barely maintain that shoebox apartment. Call me back right now." I deleted the message instantly. The truth was something I had guarded with the ferocity of a sentry for 4 years. The crisis had begun when I found the stark foreclosure notice on the kitchen counter during an obligatory visit. They were 3 months in arrears, the bank threatening legal action. Their entire financial fragility was exposed in cold legal language. I had confronted Mother about it that evening, holding the letter. "That is strictly none of your concern," she snapped, her voice tight with immediate shame. "Your father is handling all the specifics." "How is he handling it? You are 3 full months away from losing the property." "Evan is actively working on a major investment deal. Once the funding materializes, everything will be perfectly rectified." I knew with the cold certainty of a data analyst that nothing would ever be rectified by Evan. His promises were vapor. My parents would lose the only home they had ever known while waiting for a savior who existed only in their shared delusion. So I became the unwanted savior. The automatic payments commenced the following month. I structured them meticulously, making the transfers appear generic, sourced from a shell account with no immediate connection to me. Every month, I watched the principal balance decline, sharing the mortgage secret only with Marcy. This was my quiet, strategic move toward achieving genuine financial independence from their emotional neediness. I possessed the capital. Carter Analytics. The company Marcy Chen and I had co-founded had grown from a tiny niche consulting operation into something robust, substantial, and discreetly valuable. We specialized in complex data analysis for large hospital systems, helping them optimize resource allocation and predict patient outcomes with ruthless objective efficiency. It was complex work requiring precisely the pragmatic objective mindset my parents had always dismissed as cold and impractical. Marcy and I had built the company from absolute zero. 2 women in a field where we were rarely expected to lead, working side by side in her cramped spare bedroom until we could afford our first tiny shared office. Now we employed 15 full-time analysts and held major contracts across 3 states. My parents knew none of this reality. To them, I remained the quiet daughter with the vague, undemanding office job they never bothered to truly comprehend. A sharp, unexpected knock on my apartment door jolted me back to the present. I opened the door to find Marcy standing there, a slim file folder tucked securely under her arm, her face a mask of intensely focused concern. "I received your message," she said, stepping inside without awaiting an invitation. "I brought the files, all the evidence you requested." Marcy had been my college roommate, the only external witness to my complex, suffocating family life. She had been the anchor during the worst holiday visits and the first person to tell me I was capable of far more than the meager expectations my family had set for me. "They finally discovered the truth," I confirmed, closing the door behind her. "I deduced that much." She set the folder on my kitchen table, the official weight of the documents making a soft, solid thud. "Detail the sequence of events." I recounted the dinner, the phone call, the look of utter disbelief on my father's face when he heard the exact dollar amount of my commitment. As I spoke, Marcy opened the folder and spread the documents, the original mortgage paperwork, the stark bank statements, the transfer records documenting the terrifying proximity of their foreclosure. "You have paid them $340,000 over 4 years, she summarized quietly. "And they lived in complete willful ignorance of your silent success. That level of calculated detachment requires immense emotional resilience, Liv." They actively resisted the truth. I defended, staring at the neat columns of sterile figures, all that sacrifice distilled into data points. Every time I attempted to share genuine success, they minimized it. They minimized me, so I simply ceased sharing. "And you continued paying their bills." "They remain my parents. I could not bear the thought of them losing the only home they had ever known, even if they never earned the rescue." Marcy sat opposite me, her expression grave and unyielding. "You have no debt to them, Liv. You have never owed them this." "I understand that intellectually." "Then what is your tactical next move?" Marcy asked, pulling me back to the immediate crisis. I looked down at the documents, 4 years of sacrifice and silence laid bare in black and white. Tomorrow I would face them armed with this undeniable evidence. Tomorrow I would answer their shocked questions and watch the flimsy assumptions they had held for a lifetime finally crumble. "I am going to present them with exactly who I am," I stated, the decision hardening in my core. "The company, the money, the mortgage, all of it." Marcy nodded slowly. "And what do you ultimately desire from this confrontation?" That was the one question I hadn't fully prepared for. What did I actually want? A formal apology, a profound acknowledgement, an irreversible shift in their perception of their daughter. I don't know the exact outcome. I admitted, finally yielding to the core truth. But I am finished with being invisible. I am finished with their debilitating, toxic family dynamics. My phone buzzed again, a text from my father. "We must discuss this immediately, Olivia. This is a situation of extreme gravity. Return to the house." I composed my response carefully. "Tomorrow, I will arrive with all the necessary documentation for total, complete understanding." Then I powered down the phone and spent the rest of the night preparing for a confrontation that had been 28 years in the making. Morning arrived with the harsh, unwavering clarity of an exposed truth. I woke long before the alarm, my mind already running the frantic circuits of pre-rehearsed arguments and counter-strategies. Outside my high-rise window, the city of Columbus was slowly rousing the rhythmic sound of early traffic, establishing a mundane rhythm that contrasted sharply with the internal storm I carried. I knew the route to Dayton by heart, a map etched by years of necessity, built one forgotten client and one silent triumph at a time. I dressed with careful, deliberate intent, not to impress, but to feel armored for battle. Simple, high-quality fabric, nothing overtly flashy. My true power resided in the briefcase I carried, heavy with documents that would perform the necessary brutal work of speaking for themselves. This was my arsenal for breaking generational patterns. Before driving east, I sat in my car in the quiet of my underground garage and allowed myself a moment of vulnerable reflection. I needed to recall the precise, cold turning points that had forged this definitive version of Olivia, the one they were about to meet. I was 19 when I finally left for community college. I possessed exactly $200 in my checking account and a determination so fierce it bordered on cold desperation. My parents, consumed entirely by maintaining Evan's inflated sense of self-worth, had categorically refused any financial aid. Their rationale: they needed to save for Evan's real college education, despite Evan having zero actual interest in higher learning, and eventually dropping out after one disastrous, barely attended semester. That first year, I existed in a relentless blur of motion and exhaustion. I held 3 simultaneous jobs: cashiering at a local grocery during the day, waitressing at a Greasy Spoon diner 3 nights a week, and tutoring wealthy high school students on weekends. I survived on 5 hours of sleep and instant ramen. Yet my academic performance never dipped below an A. That uncompromising rigor, that refusal to fail, became my foundational act of defiance against their family favoritism. The laptop I eventually purchased, a significant investment, bought entirely with my own hard-won savings, became my true quiet lifeline. Night after night, I forewent socializing. I taught myself to code. I absorbed data structures, analyzed complex patterns, and mastered the languages of logic they had dismissed as impractical for a woman. While my peers chased parties, I built small, bespoke databases for local businesses. While Evan was spending parental funds on yet another failed concept, I was meticulously constructing the deep, invisible foundation of a future they could never have imagined. The years following graduation were a relentless, grinding ascent fueled by determination. I accepted entry-level roles consistently outperforming all expectations. Promotions came faster than anyone predicted, based purely on merit and the undeniable accuracy of my analysis. The true breakthrough arrived the day I met Marcy Chen at an obscure industry conference. We realized we shared a singular, aggressive vision for something far larger than either of us could achieve alone. Carter Analytics was conceived in the humid, chaotic confinement of Marcy's spare bedroom. We started with 2 aging laptops and a singular shared obsession: bringing sophisticated data services to healthcare. We pitched major hospitals on predictive modeling they didn't yet realize they desperately needed. We consistently worked 100-hour weeks until the momentum finally became self-sustaining. Our first major contract didn't feel like a stroke of luck. It felt like the hard-won confirmation that our vision was correct. By the time I stumbled upon my parents' mortgage crisis, I was earning more in a single month than my father had ever made in a year. The true scope of my silent success and financial independence was staggering, concealed only by my own conscious effort. The decision to intervene had been instantaneous, a cold clarity striking when I found the stark foreclosure notice on the kitchen counter. 3 months overdue. The bank's threat was unambiguous. The true fragile reality of their finances was brutally exposed. I had tried to confront Mother later that evening, holding the heavy paper. "That is strictly none of your business, Olivia." She had snapped, her voice tight with shame. "Your father is handling the management." "How is he managing?" "You are 3 full months from losing the entire house. Evan is actively engaged in a major investment deal. Once it finalizes, everything will be perfectly stable." That refusal to acknowledge reality was the true catalyst for my decision. Their raw, desperate belief in Evan's fantasy was more important than facing the truth. They would lose their home waiting for a mirage. I knew without ambiguity that the only person capable of saving them was the daughter they consistently chose to ignore. And so the quiet salvation commenced. The automatic payments started the next month. I used my company's resources to mask the source, making the transfers appear generic, untraceable. Every month, I watched the principal balance shrink. I maintained the mortgage secret, sharing it only with Marcy. It was my secret leverage, my way of both protecting and controlling a family that had offered me neither. Now, pulling my car into the familiar, slightly cracked driveway 4 years later, I accepted that the long period of intentional invisibility was definitively over. The house, viewed in the sharp, revealing light of mid-morning, looked smaller, more visibly tired. The guttering was choked with debris. the paint-faded signs of the basic maintenance father had always lamented, but consistently neglected. I sat in my car for a moment, absorbing the landscape. The man I was about to confront was the one who had defined me by his own profound limitations. The folder resting on the passenger seat felt physically heavy, weighted with the years of truths I had carried alone. The front door opened before I could even reach it. My father stood there. The performative anger from Sunday had been entirely replaced by a profound, weary strain. He looked a decade older. His aggressive confidence was gone, replaced by something I identified immediately: fear. "We must talk, Olivia," he said, the authority stripped from his voice. "Yes, Dad," I agreed, retrieving the folder. "We absolutely must." I walked past him, entering the house where I had first learned the necessity of silence, carrying the undeniable evidence that would finally force them to hear me. The living room felt intensely charged with a static, impossible tension. The physical space was unremarkable. The worn, predictable furniture, the standard family photos clustered on the mantel, but the energy had fundamentally shifted. My mother, Linda, occupied her usual corner of the sofa, her hands tightly twisted in her lap, a portrait of profound, visible anxiety. Evan stood rigid near the bay window. His arms crossed his face, set in an expression of hostile skepticism, a subtle challenge to my mere presence. My father, Thomas, sat heavily in his recliner, the weight of the moment seeming to crush his posture. No one offered the common courtesy of a seat. I remained standing in the exact center of the worn carpet, my briefcase resting against my legs, consciously positioning myself as a detached observer, not a participant in their usual destructive dynamic. "Explain this situation immediately," my father finally demanded. His voice was a strained attempt at his customary authority, but a tremor beneath the surface betrayed his desperation and engagement with our toxic family dynamics. I placed the heavy folder containing the documents onto the coffee table, but did not open it immediately. "First, understand my position. I am not here to offer a defense of my actions. I am here only to state the objective truth." "We do not require a monologue, Olivia," Evan snapped, pushing away from the window with a sudden surge of familiar impatience. His tone was accusatory, instantly attempting to diminish the weight of the moment. "Just specify the exact nature of this scheme." I met his gaze, the brother who had internalized every unearned opportunity. "What precisely do you believe is occurring, Evan? I believe you are involved in something profoundly illegal. I believe there is no plausible scenario where you could legitimately possess this quantum of money. And what is the basis for that unshakable belief?" He faltered, caught entirely off guard by the simplicity of the question. He stammered, searching for the accepted narrative. Because you are Olivia. You have always struggled financially. You have never had anything of actual substance." "I have never had anything of substance that you were willing to notice." I corrected him, the words sharp and surgically precise. "There exists a significant difference, Evan. That is the core pathology of your sibling rivalry." My mother leaned forward, her voice laced with a panicked, softer plea. Her tone appealed to a sense of familial obligation. "Olivia, please, just try to articulate this to us. We are your family. We possess a right to understand what you've been concealing." The word "deserve" struck me with an unexpected heavy blow. This family, which had spent decades defining me as insufficient, now claiming a moral right to the truth I had painstakingly guarded. "Very well." I opened the folder, the crisp sound of the paper tearing the profound silence, and extracted the first document. 4 years ago, you were precisely 3 months behind on your mortgage payments. The bank was actively preparing formal foreclosure proceedings. My father's face instantly drained of color, his posture becoming suddenly rigid. "How could you possibly acquire that knowledge?" I found the notice. It had been carelessly left on the kitchen counter during one of my routine visits, casually tucked beneath junk mail. "That was strictly private financial information," my mother protested, her voice rising with instant indignation, defensively attempting to shift the blame. "So was my decision to pay the entire balance, yet here we are." I spread the crucial documents across the coffee table: bank statements, detailed transfer records, the exact figures of principal and interest. 4 years of payments totaling $340,000 laid bare in indisputable black and white. I have been responsible for every single mortgage payment since that discovery. Every month, without fail. This is the truth of the mortgage secret. The ensuing silence was absolute, a profound vacuum of sound that seemed to suck the air from the room. My father's hands trembled visibly as he picked up one of the bank statements. I watched his eyes move slowly across the data points, watching him attempt to reconcile the undeniable data with the convenient fictional reality he had constructed about his daughter. "This cannot be possible," he whispered, the denial a final, desperate defense mechanism. "It is entirely possible, Dad. You simply made a conscious, active choice not to believe it could be true. You chose to sustain the narrative of family favoritism." Evan snatched another sheet, scanning the numbers with hurried, manic speed. "Where in the world did you manage to obtain this kind of money?" "I earned it." "Doing what precisely? Your employment is some vague, anonymous office function." I pulled out the official company registration documents. "Carter Analytics. I co-founded it 5 years ago with my business partner, Marcy. We specialize in providing complex predictive data analysis services to large healthcare organizations." You possess ownership of a company." My mother's voice was barely audible, a stunned articulation of her fundamental disbelief. "I co-own it. We employ 15 full-time analysts. We hold significant multi-year contracts across 3 states. Last year, our documented revenue exceeded $2 million. This is the documented truth of my status as a self-made woman." The room seemed to physically shrink around them as they struggled to process a reality that fundamentally contradicted every single thing they thought they knew about me. My father placed the statement back onto the table. "Why did you make the decision to never share this with us? When would that appropriate moment have arrived, Dad?" "During Sunday dinners, where I am consistently and publicly compared unfavorably to Evan. During holidays where you confidently tell relatives how profoundly worried you are about my complete lack of direction and ambition." I collected the document slowly, deliberately. "You made it painfully clear that my success, regardless of its form, held no value for you. Therefore, I ceased sharing it entirely." "That perspective is profoundly unfair, Olivia," my mother whispered, her eyes filling with instant tears, shifting from indignation to genuine, painful shame. "Is it? How many times did I attempt to articulate the nature of my work? How many times did both of you pivot the conversation back to Evan's latest perpetually pending deal?" No one offered a defense. Silence reigned absolute. I continued to pay the mortgage because, despite everything I possess, love for you, I could not tolerate the thought of you losing the only home you have ever known. But I maintained the secrecy of the payments because I knew with absolute certainty exactly how this specific conversation would unfold. I looked at each of them in turn, confirming the painful accuracy of my prediction, and I was precisely correct. My father slowly pushed himself up from the recliner, his face a swirling mask of conflict, confusion, profound regret, and a newly awakened sense of shame. "You saved our house, Dar, while you were actively telling everyone I was a disappointment." "Yes, Dad." The brutal honesty of the phrase hung heavy in the air. I watched my father visibly struggle under the immense weight of his omissions, watched my mother's defensive sadness dissolve into genuine, uncomfortable regret, and watched Evan's smug certainty crumble into pure, panicked confusion. "I am not seeking gratitude." I stated the finality, sharp and absolute. "I am not requesting anything at all. I simply needed to deliver the objective truth about the daughter you collectively refused to see. That is my true personal boundary." I retrieved my briefcase, suddenly overwhelmed by the exhaustion of the decades of effort that had culminated in this single explosive moment. "Where are you going now, Olivia?" my father demanded, his voice suddenly sharp with paternal fear. "Home. You possess the information you requested. What you choose to do with this new reality is entirely up to you." I walked out into the cold midday sun, leaving them marooned in a reality they could no longer deny. The confrontation was complete, but the psychological reckoning had only just begun. 3 full days passed in an atmosphere of suspended, unnatural silence following the detonation. It was a vacuum that felt simultaneously like a profound relief from their demands and a sharp, chilling echo of their lifelong abandonment. I continued the motion of my working life high-level client meetings, overseeing complex data models, pretending that the seismic event I had instigated in Dayton was merely a minor background tremor in Columbus. On the morning of the 4th day, my phone rang during my lunch break. It was the bank. "Ms. Carter, I'm calling regarding an unusual and frankly quite audacious request concerning the mortgage on your father's property." Daniel Ortiz's voice, usually so neutrally professional, carried a distinct edge of concern and thinly veiled amusement. "Your brother Evan has formally filed paperwork attempting to officially assume responsibility for the account." I set my sandwich down immediately. The ordinary moment shattered. "He has taken what action?" "He's arguing that the substantial payments you've been making were somehow irregular, possibly sourced improperly, or conducted under coercion. His stated intention is to restructure the entire arrangement under his own name and authority." The sheer monumental audacity of Evan's move should have shocked me. It didn't. This was pure sibling rivalry, manifested as desperate financial maneuvering, his final desperate bid for validation. "That is legally impossible, Daniel," I stated, my voice cold and steady. "The payments originated from my legitimate registered business account. You possess full documented verification from your own compliance department." "I am fully aware, Ms. Carter. Legally, he possesses zero standing. Furthermore, his personal credit profile would not remotely qualify him for this mortgage regardless of the circumstances. But I felt it necessary to make you aware of his efforts. He is deeply committed to this false compensatory narrative." Of course he was committed. Evan was fundamentally incapable of absorbing the fact that I had achieved silent success where he had only ever generated elaborate excuses. His current objective was not financial control. It was narrative control. If he could somehow seize the mortgage account, he could rewrite the core story, claiming he had been the true, ultimate financial supporter of our parents, all along minimizing my contribution to a mere irregularity or a scheme. "Thank you for the necessary warning, Daniel. Please continue the payments precisely as scheduled and continue to release absolutely no details." After terminating the call, I sat in my office, staring blankly at the highly polished mahogany wall. The anger I had carefully suppressed for days finally broke through, hot, sharp, and intensely personal. This wasn't merely about the house anymore. This was a direct, desperate attempt to seize and invalidate my hard-won narrative. Marcy appeared in the doorway, instantly sensing the profound shift in the atmosphere. "What happened? You look like you just signed a hostile takeover deal." "Worse, Evan is attempting to co-opt the entire mortgage. He's falsely claiming my 4 years of payments were fraudulent or improper, attempting to assume control." Her expression shifted instantly from professional calm to righteous outrage. "He cannot possibly pull that off. The bank knows exactly who you are, Liv." "He can't, but he's attempting to manipulate Mom and Dad into believing he can. Into believing the payments were some convoluted manipulative scheme, not a simple act of necessity." I stood up abruptly and grabbed my jacket. "I need to drive back to Dayton. Now." "Liv, you need to engage strategically. Do not allow his panic to trigger your emotional trauma response. This is about establishing personal boundaries, not about merely winning another fight." "I've spent 4 years engaging strategically," I countered, pulling my car keys from the desk drawer. "Every time I choose silence, they fill the void with their preferred version of the story. I am definitively done letting them write the narrative of my life." The drive felt longer, heavier than the previous one. A cold, relentless focus settled over me. When I pulled into my parents' familiar driveway, Evan's car was already parked there next to a sleek, unfamiliar silver sedan. My mother answered the door, her face a mask of strained tension, a visible knot of anxiety. "Olivia, We truly were not expecting your visit. I imagined not, Mom. In the living room, the tableau was immediately revealing. Evan sat rigidly on the sofa next to a sharply dressed man I didn't recognize. My father sat stiffly in his recliner, looking profoundly uncomfortable and out of his depth. A professionally suited woman sat slightly apart, typing quietly on a laptop in the corner, her presence radiating objective external authority. "Who are they, Dad?" I asked, my gaze sweeping the room. "Financial consultants," Evan interjected quickly, projecting a loud, brittle confidence. "They are assisting us to definitively comprehend the true complexity of the financial situation. The complexity being the 4 years I've been paying your mortgage while you accomplished exactly nothing." The man on the sofa cleared his throat with an oily, practiced professionalism. "Ms. Carter, your brother has raised significant questions regarding the source and legality of the funds utilized for these continuous payments." "Has he indeed?" I turned slowly to face Evan, allowing the silence to draw taut between us. "What precisely are you attempting to suggest, Evan? It does not logically accumulate," Evan insisted, spreading his hands in a theatrical gesture of reasonableness. "There is no plausible reality where you possess this quantum of disposable income. Therefore, either something profoundly illegal is occurring, or someone else is the genuine financial source and you are being manipulated." "Or," I offered calmly, "I earned it through years of focused, methodical work that you never once bothered to acknowledge, much less notice. The simple reality of a self-made woman." The woman in the corner immediately ceased typing. She looked up, her expression one of professional, detached interest. "Actually, Mr. Carter," she stated clearly, her voice cutting decisively through Evan's manufactured drama. "We have completed a preliminary review of the documentation. Carter Analytics is a verified, legitimate company with fully reconciled financials. The payments were appropriately sourced and documented." Evan's face flushed a deep, immediate red. "She could have easily falsified those records. You don't possess adequate knowledge of my sister." "The records precisely match independent verification from 3 separate financial institutions," the woman stated, completely unperturbed. She looked directly at me, and I saw a flicker of genuine professional respect in her eyes. "Your sister, Mr. Carter, has constructed something quite impressive and fully legitimate." The room fell into a heavy, inescapable silence. "So there is no irregularity whatsoever?" my father asked slowly, his gaze fixed on the consultant. "None that we can identify. Your daughter has been making consistent, legitimate scheduled payments on your mortgage for 4 years. The records clearly indicate you were within 3 months of formal foreclosure when her intervention began." "Near foreclosure?" My mother's voice was a brittle whisper laced with a new, terrifying comprehension. We were truly that close to losing everything. According to the bank records provided, yes, 3 months from official legal action. I watched my family absorb this objective external confirmation from strangers. The embarrassing, near catastrophic truth they had hidden from each other, the salvation they hadn't known about, all laid bare by professionals who held no stake in our destructive, toxic family dynamics. Evan, in a desperate final attempt to regain control of the narrative, pivoted his attack. "She was obligated to inform us. Keeping it a secret conclusively proves she had a deceptive motive. It was all strategically about control. I had nothing to conceal." I countered, my voice low and level. "I was protecting your fragile pride, Evan. Clearly that judgment was a mistake." And the consultants began to gather their papers, clearly eager to escape the suffocating domestic conflict. Evan stared at me, his resentment visibly battling with a sudden, painful, necessary recognition. "How?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible, stripped of its usual bravado. "How did you manage to do this work?" I replied, simply picking up my bag. "Sacrifice. Years of meticulously building something real while you constantly told me I was incompetent. The same way anyone builds genuine, silent success, Evan. I refused to quit simply because you did not notice the effort." I left them with that undeniable, documented truth, walking out into the afternoon sun, knowing that the long-standing walls of denial had finally been breached not by emotional argument, but by unassailable facts. Marcy was waiting for me back at my apartment. She had brought takeout Thai food complex and spicy, a deliberate contrast to the emotional blandness of my parents' life, and an intense, focused concern. "How did the three-ring circus conclude?" she asked, already opening containers. "They hired financial consultants to attempt to prove I was committing fraud," I reported, collapsing onto my large, comfortable sofa. The consultants were forced to confirm that everything was entirely legitimate, sourced from my highly solvent business. Evan's desperate bid for narrative control failed spectacularly. Of course it failed, Liv. He's structurally incapable of doing the homework. She sat opposite me, handing me a fork. "So, what is the immediate next phase of the strategy?" "The external fight is over. The internal one, the one about self-worth, is about to begin." I stared at the intricate patterns of the modern ceiling fixture. "I honestly don't know. They've spent my entire life treating me as insignificant compared to Evan. Finding out I've been their quiet safety net doesn't instantly erase 2 decades of conditioning. It doesn't happen instantly, but it has irrevocably changed the geometry of the relationship. Now you possess the authority to define the terms." We talked for hours, not strategizing a counterattack, but defining an unbreachable personal boundary. I absolutely refused to apologize for my silent success. I would not continue to hide my legitimate accomplishments to maintain their comfort zone. If they genuinely desired a relationship with me moving forward, it would be strictly with the real me, the woman who owned the multi-million-dollar company, not the failure they preferred to pity. By morning, after numerous revisions, we had drafted a carefully worded, emotionally mature letter addressed jointly to my parents. It outlined not demands, but clear, non-negotiable statements. The mortgage payments would continue, but only because I consciously chose to continue them, not out of residual obligation, not out of any remaining guilt, but out of a deeply ingrained, frustratingly persistent protective love they had never earned, but which I felt anyway. The letter was a declaration of my financial independence and emotional autonomy. "Are you absolutely certain about mailing this?" Marcy asked, watching me seal the thick, formal envelope. "This act irrevocably burns the bridge back to the old comfortable dynamic." "I am not certain about the eventual outcome, but I am absolutely certain that the alternative is a perpetual, slow, quiet death of my spirit. I cannot continue existing in 2 parallel, contradictory lives. I need to force them into breaking generational patterns." I mailed the letter that afternoon and immediately returned to work, immersing myself in the demanding logic of data models. My life continued self-sustaining and focused, regardless of my family's pace of acceptance. 3 days later, my father called. His name flashed on the screen, causing an involuntary sharp spike in my pulse. "Your mother and I urgently need to talk," he said immediately. His voice sounded profoundly different, stripped of its usual booming certainty, smaller, quieter. It was the sound of a man beginning to feel genuine remorse. "Talk about what specifically, Dad?" "Everything. The mortgage secret, the company, the years we clearly spent failing to truly pay any attention whatsoever." I closed my office door, signaling Marcy for silence. "Are you prepared to genuinely listen, Dad? Without offering a defense, without pivoting the subject back to Evan's grievances?" "I am attempting to be prepared, Olivia." A long pause stretched across the line, filled only by the quiet hum of his awareness. "I've spent the last 72 hours rereading those bank statements, and I've been actively thinking about what you said, about how we just assumed things about you that were profoundly, dangerously untrue. And what conclusion did you finally reach?" "That I am sincerely sorry." The apology was audible, rough-pulled from a lifetime of emotional resistance. "I am profoundly sorry for failing to truly see you, Olivia, for consciously neglecting to give you the platform to show us the incredible self-made woman you were becoming, for the destructive family favoritism." I sat in absolute silence, allowing the single monumental apology to settle. A single apology could never possibly undo 28 years of dismissal and subtle cruelty, but it was undeniably a foundational, necessary beginning. "Tomorrow," I finally said. "I will come back tomorrow, and Dad, Please ensure Evan remains absent from the house. This conversation needs to be strictly between the three of us. I understand completely. I will ensure he is occupied. I desperately want to start the process of rebuilding trust. I terminated the call and stared at the dark screen. The father, who had never once apologized for anything in his life, had just admitted monumental failure. Something fundamental was shifting beneath the surface of my family, and I still didn't know if it was shifting toward genuine repair or merely toward a different, more complex kind of damage. That night's sleep was elusive. By morning, I had solidified my approach. I would drive to Dayton with an open mind, but with absolutely rigid boundaries. I would listen to their attempts at explanation. I would share more of my complex truth. And I would refuse absolutely to compromise the woman I had forged myself into, simply to fit back into the small, familiar role they had assigned me as a child. My parents' house looked strangely, significantly different in the soft, revealing light of the morning. The slightly faded paint no longer registered as simple neglect. It felt like a visible history. The untrimmed hedges and the familiar, slightly warped porch spoke of years passing of two people slowly aging within walls they had nearly lost without ever knowing their daughter had been the silent, unexpected savior. My father opened the door instantly before my knuckles could even connect with the wood. He looked profoundly weary, strained, like he had spent the last week engaged in a brutal internal war. "Please come in, Olivia," he said quietly, moving aside. The living room had been meticulously, almost frantically cleaned. A small vase of fresh, brightly colored flowers sat on the coffee table, a gesture so entirely out of the ordinary, so profoundly unlike my mother's usual austerity, that I stopped and stared. It was a small, conscious offering, a tentative step toward rebuilding trust. "Your mother insisted on them," my father explained, noticing my pause. "She wanted the room to feel correct, respectful." My mother, Linda, emerged from the kitchen doorway. She avoided direct eye contact, a new symptom of her discomfort, but offered a small, hesitant nod in my direction. "I have made coffee," she said, her voice unusually subdued. We sat down, the three of us in a triangular configuration that felt both achingly familiar and entirely new. No Evan to dominate the air, no performance required for invisible relatives. Only my parents and the daughter were finally desperately ready to truly see. My father was the first to break the heavy, profound silence. "I've been diligently studying the documents you left, the bank statements, the company records." He shook his head slowly, a profound sign of bewilderment. "I do not understand the technical language of your work, not half of what I was reading, but I understood the precise, cold numbers." "The objective numbers rarely deceive, Dad," I agreed softly. "No, they do not." He looked at me, his eyes searching, attempting to piece together a reality he had systematically ignored. "Tell me about Carter Analytics, Olivia. Start from the very beginning, the genesis of the idea, the first day of operation." So I detailed the full story. I recounted the founding with Marcy in the cramped, airless spare bedroom. I described the brutal 100-hour weeks, the initial soul-crushing rejections, and the subsequent thrilling momentum of silent success. I detailed the first major hospital contract and the exponential growth that followed the difficult, meaningful work of building something entirely out of nothing, fueled by my own self-worth. They listened. They truly listened, perhaps for the very first time in my entire adult life. "That sounds enormously intricate," my mother said when I finished describing the complex process of predictive data analysis we employed. "It is intricate, but I have always been highly proficient at it," I stated, meeting her gaze directly. "I have always been skilled at discerning complex patterns and solving difficult problems. You simply never bothered to ask about it." The mild, undeniable accusation hung between us. Neither of them attempted to offer a denial or an excuse. I looked toward the mantelpiece dominated by the familiar photos of Evan's milestones. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of heavy cardstock. "Do you recognize this, Mom?" They both shook their heads, their expressions filled with genuine deep curiosity. "It is an industry award I won 2 years ago. Industry Innovator in Healthcare Data Analytics." I unfolded the paper, showing them the photograph of the engraved plaque. I never informed you because genuinely I knew you would not care or fully comprehend the magnitude of the achievement. My mother's eyes immediately filled with tears. Olivia, Last year, I was invited to speak at a national conference in Seattle. Next month, I am formally scheduled to present a paper on resource optimization at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Johns Hopkins? My mother's voice was a barely audible whisper of shock. Yes, one of the most prestigious medical institutions in the entire country. I carefully refolded the paper. This is the documented reality of who I am. And you would have known all of this years ago if either of you had ever genuinely bothered to ask a single meaningful question about my life beyond the superficial. This realization hammered home the depth of their decades-long family favoritism. The silence stretched thick and difficult. My father spoke his voice gravelly, with immense regret. We catastrophically failed you, Olivia. We completely missed the truth of the self-made woman you became. Yes, you did fail me. We know we cannot in any way undo the decades of oversight. No, you absolutely cannot undo it. But we can attempt to conduct ourselves better going forward. He looked at my mother, whose eyes were wet with unfeigned tears, and then back at me. If you are willing to allow us this chance to slowly repair this relationship. I thought about all the years of silent Sunday dinners. I don't know if I can ever fully, completely forgive everything, I said, offering the only honest answer I possessed. But I am willing to observe if genuine fundamental change and the necessary breaking of generational patterns is truly possible. My mother reached across the coffee table and hesitantly placed her hand over mine. I am truly sorry for making you feel so completely invisible for so long, Liv. You did not merely make me feel invisible, Mom. You actively, consciously made me invisible. I squeezed her hand anyway, a tiny necessary gesture of acknowledgement. But I am no longer a passive presence. That phase of my life is definitively over. We talked for hours afterward, real substantial conversation, the kind we had never managed to sustain before. When I finally stood to leave, something profound had shifted between us. It was not forgiveness, not entirely, but it was the painful, necessary start of a mutual understanding. We were taking the first terrifying steps toward rebuilding trust. The days following that painful, necessary conversation at the house settled into an intensely uneasy, yet different rhythm. My parents now called with increasing frequency, asking tentative, often clumsy questions about my complex work questions they had never bothered to formulate before. My mother, in a startling visible shift, began sending me links to current articles on healthcare technology. My father texted small, careful updates about minor maintenance projects at the house, small, observable actions that were his tangible, slow way of acknowledging my essential, ongoing financial independence contribution. But this new domestic truce was profoundly fragile. The instability I had exposed had not been resolved externally. It had simply shifted its focus, becoming a concentrated internal pressure point that pressed directly on my sense of self-worth. Evan predictably would not accept his new marginalized position in the family drama. The brother who had always been the undisputed priority was now confronted with a sister who had decisively surpassed him, not through luck, but through sheer measurable competence and promotion. His deeply ingrained entitlement could not process the magnitude of the impact. His sibling rivalry had devolved from a casual competition into a desperate, toxic struggle for his very identity. He called me late one night shortly after 2 a.m, his voice thick, slurring, and intensely aggressive. "You really think you've definitively won now?" he demanded, the alcohol stripping away his remaining pretense. "You think having a large stock portfolio somehow elevates you to being a better human than me?" "I do not believe I am inherently superior to you, Evan," I replied, my voice steady, pulling on all my professional reserve. I simply ceased actively participating in the delusion that I was somehow inherently less than you. I claimed my true value. "You deliberately set out to make me look like a pathetic, absolute failure to them. You orchestrated your own appearance of failure, Evan. I merely stopped covering for you. I stopped actively hiding the facts that utterly contradicted your invented story." He hung up the phone with a violent final slam. Over the subsequent weeks, his desperate attempts to contact me escalated voicemails I deleted without listening to aggressive texts I systematically ignored. Each attempt to bait me only served as a clear, necessary reminder of precisely why I had sought out obscurity for so long and the true nature of their toxic family dynamics. The internal tension culminated when my mother called, her voice high and trembling with raw tears. "Evan is actively spreading truly terrible accusations to all the relatives, Olivia. He's telling everyone you paid the mortgage only as an elaborate, calculated scheme to exert manipulation and control over the entire family. He claims this is all an act of revenge. And what conclusion have you personally reached, Mom?" A long, significant silence stretched between us, weighted entirely by her own internal battle between loyalty and truth. "I have concluded that you acted out of love, Liv. Even though your father and I gave you absolutely no logical reason to. I see your profound emotional resilience." It was perhaps the most emotionally mature and honest statement my mother had ever directed toward me. It offered a crucial moment of healing that had nothing to do with Evan. Then what possible difference does Evan's manufactured desperate family drama make to your truth? "It matters because he is your brother, Olivia. Because I desperately do not want our family unit to be permanently, irrevocably fractured." I leaned against my kitchen counter, staring out at the empty, dark street. The same family unit that had systematically fractured me piece by painful piece for 28 years. Mom, Evan is a grown man. He is entirely entitled to hold whatever emotional reaction he chooses to my success. But I will not apologize for the life I have meticulously built, and I will not voluntarily return to being excluded. That is my definitive personal boundary. The conversation ended without easy closure. The internal wound remained open. Marcy found me later that evening, sitting absolutely motionless in my office, staring at a blank, glowing computer screen. This was the true battlefield, the quiet mind. "Severe family fallout?" she asked quietly, instantly recognizing the signs. "A chronic structural condition," I admitted wryly. She pulled up a spare chair and sat down, her posture reflecting a deep, challenging sincerity. "You know what I've been observing, Liv? Since the truth broke, you've been subconsciously waiting for their permission to be definitively okay. You keep checking your phone, looking for the final official stamp of approval." I opened my mouth to immediately argue, but the protest died instantly on my tongue. She was absolutely chillingly correct. "It's old, ingrained programming," I admitted, my voice low. "It's profoundly difficult to overwrite that deep-seated need for approval from them. That old programming is now actively, aggressively holding back the new version of yourself. You do not require their blessing, Liv. You never have. You built this entire empire as a founder on pure, relentless merit. At some critical point, you must detach from the need for their validation and simply profoundly live your successful life as the true self-made woman you are." That night alone with the Stark City lights, I reached a profound, necessary internal decision. My internal conflict was not about their forgiveness. It was about my detachment. I would stop passively waiting for my family's emotional bandwidth to finally catch up with my documented reality. My focus would shift entirely to my own future. I would live my life fully, openly, and without any further internal concessions. I drafted a clear, concise email outlining strict, non-negotiable behavioral boundaries. No more late-night drunken harassment from Evan. No more family events where my accomplishments were subtly minimized or ignored. No more pretense that the last 28 years of emotional oversight had not happened. The response arrived the following morning almost immediately. It came not from my mother, but from my father. "I understand your boundaries, Olivia, and I completely concur with every stated point. Please call me when you have a free moment. I have something critically important I need to share with you." For the very first time in what felt like weeks, I experienced a genuine small spark of something that was purely my own emotional resilience, not dependent on their validation. The full unvarnished truth about the Carter family finances and the source of their salvation finally exploded into the public domain at Aunt Carol's lavish annual Christmas party. This was the required external conflict. I had never intended to be there, but my father had called me specifically formally and personally requested my attendance. "I need the entire family to hear the truth directly from us, Olivia," he had insisted, his voice now firm with a new necessary resolve. "Evan's completely false version of events successfully poisons the entire extended family. I need to finish breaking generational patterns." So I drove the distance and went. I selected a simple, elegant dark dress and low heels, nothing that screamed wealth, but nothing that allowed me to be easily dismissed. The party was held at Aunt Carol's sprawling ranch-style home, a house that symbolized the solid, unquestioned stability of the successful branch of the family tree. Cars lined the quiet street for blocks. Through the brightly lit windows, I could see the familiar constellation of relatives, the same people who had watched me grow up while systematically ignoring my development. My parents met me immediately at the front door, an unexpected unified front. "Are you truly ready for this, Liv?" My father asked, his hand resting lightly, protectively on my shoulder. "Not in the slightest, Dad," I confessed. "But we must proceed anyway. This confrontation is necessary." We walked in together, the three of us, and the high-volume, chaotic chatter of the party instantly collapsed into a profound, startled silence. Every single head turned toward the front hall. Evan stood rigid by the heavily laden punch bowl, his face flushing a deep, visible red when he saw me enter. He had clearly anticipated that I would choose to stay away, allowing his distorted narrative of sibling rivalry to become the accepted truth by default. Aunt Carol, the matriarch of the social circle, approached first, her expression a careful mix of curiosity and practiced diplomacy. "Olivia, we were genuinely not certain you would be able to attend." I nearly did not attend, I confirmed, meeting her gaze squarely. "There has been a great deal of unsettling discussion circulating amongst us, dear, concerning you and your brother's financial situation. This family drama is quite consuming." "I am well aware of the discussion, Carol. That is precisely my reason for being here tonight." My father stepped forward, separating himself from my mother and me. I saw in his posture something I had never witnessed before: raw, unapologetic courage, a man finally prepared to prioritize honesty over pride, to face the injustice of his past actions. "I require the attention of everyone in this room," he announced, his voice carrying powerfully across the sudden silence. "I have a necessary, critical announcement to make. It concerns my daughter, Olivia." The room became absolutely silent, every relative frozen in place, waiting for the judgment. "For the past 4 years," my father began, his voice clear and remarkably steady, "Olivia has been paying the entire mortgage on our primary residence, $85,000 a year drawn from the legitimate earnings of a technology company she founded and owns." He paused, allowing the raw, staggering numbers to fully sink into the silence. "We were within 3 months of formally losing the property when she intervened. We did not know, we never asked, and until very recently we certainly did not deserve her incredible assistance. This is the truth of the mortgage secret." I watched the initial wave of reaction ripple through the assembled relatives. Shock, immediate disbelief. Some faces showed sudden, uncomfortable shame at their own assumptions about our decades of favoritism. "Evan has been aggressively attempting to claim that Olivia manipulated us, that she paid the mortgage only to exert control." My father continued, his voice hardening slightly. "That accusation is unequivocally false. She conducted this out of pure, sustained love for her family, even when we gave her absolutely no rational reason to." Aunt Carol's hand flew to her chest, her carefully maintained composure finally fracturing. "Thomas, we truly had no idea that you were in such profound peril." "No one did, Carol, because Linda and I were too ashamed and far too busy overlooking the extraordinary achievement of our own daughter to ask for help." He turned directly to me, his voice thick with emotion. "Olivia, I am deeply, publicly sorry. I apologize in front of everyone here for the years I spent actively, consciously overlooking you." Evan, finally galvanized by the catastrophic collapse of his entire public position, pushed forward. His face was not contorted with simple rage, but with a profound, visible disorientation. "This is a preposterous manufactured melodrama. She is merely playing all of you for sympathy." "No, Evan," I said, finding my own voice, ensuring it carried. "I have never sought attention or sympathy. I only ever wanted to be left alone to meticulously build my legitimate life. I wanted parents who noticed me. I wanted a brother who wasn't so profoundly threatened by my own financial independence. I failed to receive those things. So I settled for ensuring my family maintained their home." "You are deceiving everyone present," Evan hissed, his eyes wild, losing the internal battle. "The bank records verified by external financial consultants prove otherwise. You reviewed the documents yourself." I took a deliberate, measured step toward him. "I was never your primary enemy, Evan. The only person you are genuinely competing with is the person you failed to become." He stared at me for a long, desperate moment. The visible hostility drained away, replaced by an utter naked disorientation. He abruptly turned and walked out of the party. Not one single person attempted to stop him. He left behind his entire self-constructed narrative collapsing under the weight of the undeniable truth. The karma had landed, but it was heavy, not satisfying. After that moment, the entire mood of the party changed. Relatives approached me one by one, their eyes holding a new, genuine curiosity. Some offered clumsy, sincere apologies for the assumptions they had made. Others asked intelligent, direct questions about Carter Analytics, recognizing the self-made woman before them. A few held back, struggling painfully to reconcile the insignificant Olivia they thought they knew with the self-possessed, successful woman now standing before them. My cousin Jennifer, whom I had always liked, hugged me tightly. "I always knew you would achieve something magnificent, Liv," she whispered fiercely. "Thank you for that belief, Jennifer. I genuinely needed it." My mother found me later standing alone on the back porch as the evening slowly wound down. "That public declaration was incredibly difficult, Olivia," she said softly, sitting beside me. "What your father did. It was an admission of responsibility, Mom, and it was long overdue." "Yes, it was." She reached out and touched my hand gently. "I know we cannot erase the past, but I want you to know in your heart that I truly see you now. I see all of it clearly." We sat in a long, companionable silence, mother and daughter finally painfully on equal and honest ground. My father requested that I meet him at an old independent diner the following weekend. Not the house, not a formal gathering, but a neutral public space. Just the two of us. The diner he selected was an institution, the kind of place that had been serving the exact same comfort food menu for nearly 40 years. I remembered the heavy, slightly sticky red vinyl booths and the waitresses who called every customer Arn. We used to frequent this spot when I was a very young child, before Evan was old enough to demand total dominance of every family outing. The rich smell of frying bacon and sizzling butter triggered a rush of small, forgotten, almost painful memories I didn't realize I still carried. He was already seated in a worn corner booth. I noticed a faint etched T+L heart on the tabletop, barely visible, half erased a ghost of his own youth. He stood immediately when he saw me approach. "Thank you profoundly for agreeing to meet with me, Olivia," he said, his voice quiet, lacking any of his old bravado. "Of course, Dad." We ordered coffee and breakfast specials, then settled into a silence that was profoundly different this time. It wasn't the heavy quiet of avoidance, but the expectant hush before an inevitable final truth. It was my father who finally spoke. "I've spent the entire week attempting to find the right articulation to convey this," he began, stirring his coffee meticulously without taking a sip. "I owe you much more than just a simple apology. I owe you a true, necessary explanation. An explanation for what precisely, Dad, for why I treated you the way I did, for the persistent, painful family favoritism towards Evan, for why I consciously denied you the necessary attention and encouragement you absolutely deserved. I waited, offering no prompts, giving him the immense space required to construct his difficult truth. When you were first born, I was terrified, Olivia. He set his spoon down carefully. I honestly possessed no knowledge of how to raise a daughter. I knew how to be a father to a son. My own father had modeled that for me, however imperfectly. But a daughter, I felt completely, utterly lost. I allowed the old toxic family dynamics of my own upbringing to dictate my behavior, rather than learning new ones. So, you made the choice to ignore me entirely. I maintained a conscious distance. I defensively rationalized it by telling myself that you were inherently strong, that you didn't require me the way Evan did. I told myself your mother would handle the emotional side. He shook his head, a gesture of profound self-disgust. It was monumental, absolute cowardice, nothing less. I lacked the emotional resilience necessary to admit my own profound inadequacy. I desperately required you too, Dad, just differently than Evan. I know that now, and if I am truly honest with myself, I possessed that knowledge even then. But admitting that truth would have meant admitting I was failing you, an impossible, terrifying admission for me. His voice cracked rough with tightly held back emotion. So I chose the simpler, easier path. I chose to believe you were inherently fine, that your incredible self-made woman independence was a natural gift rather than a brutal necessity forced upon you by my absence. I became independent because I was offered absolutely no other choice. I know. He finally met my gaze, and I saw the raw, unshed tears in his eyes. When I discovered the truth about the mortgage secret, about the incredible life and company you had built, I realized what a delusional, self-involved fool I had been. My daughter had transformed into this extraordinary, resilient woman, and I consciously missed every single moment of that necessary transformation. You could have asked a single question at any point. I was too deeply afraid of the potential answer, afraid that the data would unequivocally prove you had done better, exponentially better, without my help than Evan had done with every advantage and excuse I afforded him. He pushed his plate aside, suddenly unable to look at the food. And that is exactly what happened. Your silent success was the loudest statement of my failure. I nodded slowly, letting the painful, absolute finality of his admission settle deep within me. That is a profoundly difficult truth for any father to accept. It is the truth, and I have spent far too many years of my life deliberately avoiding the most difficult truths. He reached across the table and firmly took my hand. Olivia, I know I cannot and should not attempt to rewind time and be the father I should have been decades ago. But I can and I will try to be the father you deserve starting right now. If you will allow me this chance to rebuild trust. The waitress returned to refill our coffee cups. The brief intrusion a necessary reprieve from the intensity. What does that actually look like, Dad? I asked when she left. Being the father I deserve. It looks like asking intelligent questions about your work and genuinely listening to the answer. It looks like attending your presentations. It looks like meeting Marcy and your colleagues. It looks like being overtly, publicly proud of you, not just quietly grateful. And Evan? His face tightened instantly. Evan is going to have to find his own solitary path forward. I spent 30 years actively trying to force him into a shape he was never meant to be. All that misdirected effort did was severely cripple him emotionally and profoundly hurt you. We are finally breaking generational patterns. He is still your son, Dad. And you are still my daughter. But I am finished choosing between you. I am finished allowing his sustained failures to determine the narrative of your unparalleled success. He squeezed my hand, a gesture of absolute finality. You decisively won, Olivia. Not because you defeated your brother in a sibling rivalry, but because you built something tangible and real while I was deliberately focusing all my attention on someone who only built elaborate excuses. We finished our breakfast in a new kind of silence, not the oppressive quiet of things unsaid, but the peaceful, companionable hush of an understanding hard-won and finally achieved. As we walked out into the cool morning sun, my father did something he had not done since I was a small child. He stopped me on the sidewalk and hugged me, a real solid, necessary embrace. "I am so deeply proud of you, Liv," he whispered into my hair. "I should have articulated that profound truth years ago, but I am stating it clearly right now." "Thank you, Dad. That truly means everything." "No, thank you." For not abandoning us entirely, for saving our home, for giving me this painful, necessary chance to finally know the complex, brilliant woman you have become." I drove home feeling something I had not experienced in decades, a real, cautious hope that perhaps, just perhaps, we could slowly build the honest family we should have been all along. The final, absolute public reckoning led to a profound, immediate silence, but the stability within our small family unit remained structurally fragile. My parents continued their careful, steady work toward rebuilding trust, but Evan disappeared into his own shame. My father formally requested the attendance of every available relative at Uncle Arnold's large holiday gathering 2 weeks later. He insisted he had one final critically important public announcement to make to cement the new reality. I arrived with my parents, a newly forged unified front that was utterly unrecognizable just a month prior. Evan arrived separately. He had avoided all contact with me since his emotional exit from Aunt Carol's party, and I respected that distance. The house was packed. My father called for quiet attention from the center of the brightly decorated living room. "I know there has been profound confusion and gossip within this family drama," he began, his voice firm and unwavering. "Tonight, I need there to be no remaining doubt or misunderstanding about our toxic family dynamics." I scanned the room for my brother. He stood alone in a distant corner, his arms wrapped tightly around his torso in a posture I had never witnessed in him before. It was not the familiar arrogance or even defensiveness. It was something closer to profound, debilitating emotional dislocation. His entire sense of self-worth was destabilized and exposed. He looked broke, not financially, but psychologically. "For 30 years, my father continued, his voice carrying the full weight of his past errors, "I raised my 2 children by 2 completely different rule books. Evan received every possible advantage. Olivia received absolutely none of that. She was forced to build her life in silence alone." The room was held in a profound, heavy silence. When she succeeded, I told myself it was simple luck. When she attempted to share her achievements, I deliberately changed the subject. He turned slowly to look directly at me. I was catastrophically wrong. Evan did not interrupt. He stood absolutely motionless, staring fixedly at the polished wooden floor. Olivia built a successful technology company worth millions, while Linda and I were actively telling relatives she could barely afford her rent. She single-handedly saved our family home while we were passively waiting for a financial miracle that never arrived. My father's voice, though thick with emotion, held a new, powerful pride. "She is not the excluded daughter we insisted she was. She is in every measurable way profoundly better than we ever gave her credit for. She is a founder and self-made woman of tremendous financial independence." I expected Evan to finally erupt, to launch a desperate last-ditch defense. But he did none of those things. Instead, he slowly, deliberately sank onto a low, upholstered chair, his face pale, his entire physical posture radiating collapse. I genuinely did not know the full truth," he said, his voice quiet, almost lost, revealing a moment of genuine confusion and betrayal. "I didn't know the depth of the mortgage secret." I walked slowly toward him, uncertain of what I would find. The brother I had grown up with was many things entitled cruel, but the man sitting on that chair looked like a stranger, a man whose entire manufactured identity had just spectacularly imploded under the weight of injustice. "Evan," I said gently, kneeling down to meet his level. He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes that had never been there before. Not the expected anger, not resentment, just a cold, naked fear, the true exposed face of his crippling insecurity. "Who am I supposed to be now, Liv?" he whispered, his voice thin with panic. His identity was defined by his potential, which had been exposed as vapor. "If I am not the successful one, if I am not the one predestined to take care of the family, What is fundamentally left of me? I maintained eye contact, my voice steady and low. You are still my brother Evan. That fundamental relationship has not changed. But everything else has. He looked around the room at the sea of relatives. They are all judging me differently now. I can perceive it. They are simply seeing you honestly, Evan, maybe for the very first time in your life. I don't know how to navigate being this person. His voice finally broke. I don't know how to be the one who failed. You haven't failed yet, I corrected him firmly. You have merely been living under a false narrative about yourself. Now you have the painful necessary task of figuring out who you genuinely are, independent of my existence. You need to cultivate your own emotional resilience. He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. How can you be so incredibly calm, Olivia? After every cutting thing I've said about you, every deliberate act of manipulation in this sibling rivalry. Because I spent years consumed by that same destructive anger, Evan, and it nearly destroyed the woman I was trying to build. I refuse to see that happen to you. That is not my revenge. I slowly stood up. I am not and never was your enemy. I simply stopped being your willing co-conspirator. My father approached his face a complex blend of parental concern and a quiet, profound pride in my restraint. Evan, he said, his hand resting on his shoulder. I owe you an apology, too. I forced you into a public role you were never equipped to handle. I made you believe you had to be something you weren't. That failure is entirely mine. Evan looked between us, his expression utterly lost, a man without a functional map. I don't know what to do with all of this truth, he confessed. You don't have to take immediate action, I told him, my voice softening. Just stop fighting me. Stop trying to prove I'm the obstacle to your success. Perhaps then we can eventually figure out how to be brother and sister again. He nodded slowly, a gesture of profound exhaustion and reluctant acceptance. A month after the final public confrontation at Uncle Arnold's, I woke up in my new apartment and was instantly enveloped by a feeling I had completely forgotten existed: sustained peace. The winter sun streamed through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, a feature I had specifically requested when I purchased the property. The space was triple the size of my old anonymous unit, boasting an unobstructed commanding view of the entire Columbus skyline that served as a daily, tangible reminder of precisely how far I had propelled myself. I had finally fully allowed myself to live in a manner that mirrored the reality of my professional, silent success. The transition had not been entirely seamless. The old habits of minimization, of keeping my achievements quiet, of consciously living small to avoid potential jealousy or attention, those psychological patterns were etched deeply into my character. But slowly, deliberately, and with necessary vigilance, I was building a life that was finally perfectly congruent with the self-made woman I had secretly become. Carter Analytics continued its aggressive growth trajectory. The presentation at Johns Hopkins had been a profound success, leading to new contracts and potential collaborations that promised international expansion. Marcy and I were actively discussing our entry into the European market. The future that had once seemed impossible when I was a broke girl teaching myself complex coding on a battered second-hand laptop was now unfolding before me with dazzling clarity. My father was a frequent welcome presence in my new life. He visited every few weeks, not out of duty, but with genuine engaged curiosity. He asked intelligent, probing questions about my work. He met Marcy and openly marveled at the complex ecosystem we had built together. He would sit in my spacious living room surrounded by the undeniable evidence of my financial independence, and instead of subtly minimizing it, he actively celebrated it. You deserve every bit of this, Olivia, he told me during a recent visit, his voice filled with sincere regret. I only wish I had possessed the necessary wisdom to believe in you years sooner. You believe in me now, Dad. That is what genuinely counts. We are finally breaking generational patterns. My mother was adapting more slowly. The habits of dismissal and emotional distance were proving harder for her to break entirely. But she was visibly, palpably trying. She now sent me researched articles about successful women in business. She called to ask specific questions about my upcoming presentations. She had ceased entirely to pivot every single conversation back to Evan's issues, proving her commitment to rebuilding trust. And Evan. Our relationship remained and would likely always remain complex and nuanced. He had not offered a formal grand apology for the decades of condescension, but something fundamental had shifted in him since that night at Uncle Arnold's. The abrupt, shocking confrontation with his own lack of identity had cracked his shell, and what was emerging was not the self-aggrandizing brother I had known. I invited him to a neutral dinner a few weeks after the extended family gathering. Just the two of us. "I have been thinking incessantly," he confessed over the appetizers, "about what you said to me, about the need to figure out who I actually am outside of our parents' expectations. And what tangible progress have you made?" "Not much, honestly, but I have formally enrolled in some actual accredited business courses." He looked almost genuinely embarrassed by the admission. "Real courses, not just ideas I read about online. I thought maybe I could learn to build something solid." "Like you managed to do." It wasn't an apology, but it was a profound necessary start, a true shift away from the sibling rivalry and towards genuine self-worth. The original mortgage payments continued. I had seriously considered terminating the arrangement after the truth was finally exposed, but I ultimately chose to keep paying, not out of residual obligation, not out of any lingering guilt, but out of a choice of pure, freely given protective love. My ability to maintain that mortgage secret, only to choose to continue it openly, was my final act of autonomy. "You could certainly deploy that capital for yourself, Liv," Marcy pointed out logically. "I absolutely could, but helping them no longer diminishes me. That is the necessary difference now. I am consciously choosing to provide this stability." On a quiet Sunday evening, I stood on my new apartment balcony, watching the lights of the city flicker on across the vast skyline. I thought back to this girl I had been, the one who ate Sunday dinners in suffocating silence while her father raged about imaginary debt and her brother casually mocked her poverty. That girl had truly believed she was invisible, profoundly worthless, destined to always remain less than. I walked back inside towards the small side table where I kept my old, well-worn leather billfold, the one I used when I was working 3 jobs in college. Inside, tucked into a forgotten sleeve, was the faded yellow copy of the first $85,000 transfer receipt I had ever made to the bank 4 years ago. The paper was creased, the ink smudged, a tangible relic of my years of struggle and emotional resilience. I pulled it out, looked at the raw, staggering number, and then tore it neatly, deliberately in half. The past was documented, reconciled, and now finally disposable. I tossed the pieces into the waste bin. I turned back toward the window. The vast city stretched before me, a map of my future, entirely free from the shadows of that small, dark house. My name is Olivia Carter, and this is where my story truly begins, free from the past, just getting started. If you have been listening to this story and recognizing fragments of your own complex life, the dismissive parents, the favored sibling, the long, quiet years of feeling like your effort would never be sufficient, I want you to hold on to this fundamental truth. Your inherent worth is never determined by the people who should have celebrated you, but consciously chose not to. Your potential is not and never was limited by the small, suffocating boxes others attempted to confine you within. You are capable of achieving far more than you currently allow yourself to know. You only have to grant yourself the permission to truly begin. If you are connected with the journey of finding your self-worth and standing up for your truth, please consider leaving a comment below and sharing your experience. And if you want to continue hearing complex, honest stories about self-made women who refuse to accept the limiting expectations others placed on them, please hit subscribe and stay connected for the next one.